All right, let's get started. So, as I had shared in our WhatsApp group chat, that today's topic would be on fighting fear. Now, full disclaimer, this is a very broad topic, and you can look at this from a variety of angles. But essentially, the purpose of our group is to engage with each other in the Word of God and look at it from the perspective of the Bible. And so that's the approach that we're going to be using. And to clarify, my input into this is it's coming from the perspective of personal experience and things that I have learned through my spiritual development. And so I hope to hear from you guys as well as to what you may have learned throughout your own spiritual journey. So the first thing is, because this is our first session of 2023, I want to revisit some of the things that we used to do in our previous sessions, and then we'll get right into the topic. So the first thing is, as I had shared with you guys last year, the vision of this group is to make sure that we leave each of these sessions more hopeful than when we started. And the way to do that is by not only participating and also engaging in the way that you can, but also making sure that outside of these sessions that you are following in your own spiritual walk. Just simple and general ground rules: respecting one another, listening actively to one another, uplifting one another. Confidentiality is big, because I shared with you guys last year as well, like some of the stories that you may want to share or will share. I don't want anybody to feel like that it's going to be brought up again in a different context. And then lastly, just understanding that we're all imperfect, we all make mistakes, and this is what we're here for, to learn in community. So the first thing I want to start off with is, what is fear? And I'm sure all of you know already generally what fear is, but I want to help define it, because defining anything that you're looking to analyze helps you create the boundary in which you can work within. So what is fear? It's an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. Now, there's two different ways to look at fear. There's the biochemical reaction, which happens in our brain, and then there's the emotional reaction, which is more subjective. The biochemical reaction is something that's the same in all humans, or similar at least, because it's the scientific chemical processes that happen within your brain. So that's more objective. But the emotional reaction is more subjective, because that's dependent on your life experiences, your background, and how you were raised, the things that you've seen in your life. So that one is more subjective. I want to look at where fear comes from, and then we'll get into the Word of God from here. But fear stems from the part of your brain. It's called the amygdala. It's the smallest part of your brain. And essentially, there's a term for it in psychology. They call it the lizard brain. And what happens is because our brain is just a series of chemical reactions, anytime our brain senses danger, it has the response of fear. But the thing is, our brain cannot differentiate between good fear versus bad fear. And that's where part of our struggle as human comes in, because we feel fear in any scenario. So it's like, whether you're in a dark forest surrounded by, dangerous creatures, or you're going to a job interview and you're nervous or you're feeling afraid, the feeling itself might be the same, but the external circumstances are different. And so this is the part of the brain that controls you. And all of this is just to establish two things. First thing is, we all have fear in our lives, and it is okay to feel fearful. There's a lot of people that I have personally spoken with, and I feel that I've experienced this personally as well, that sometimes when we feel fear, we couple that with shame, because we feel shameful of the fact that why we are afraid when others are not. One of the most prime examples of this was like, when, again, going back to a job interview setting, if you are preparing for a job interview and everybody around you is telling you, you got this, like you're highly qualified, you're going to kill it, you're going to be excellent in this interview, and you still feel this fear because there's a little bit of uncertainty, you might actually start to feel guilt, because you're thinking to yourself, well, everybody's saying I should be feeling this way, but I'm not feeling this way. So is there something wrong with me? So the first thing I want to establish is that we all have fear and it is normal to have it. And the second thing I want to establish is that fear is here to stay. It is not something that you'll ever get out of your life. And so what you want to do is you want to use it to your advantage. And those two things are very important to remember, because oftentimes we spend a lot of time fighting the wrong battle. And one of the wrong battles that I have found in my life I've spent fighting is how to seem like I'm fearless. And that's not necessarily the end goal here, because that would actually be an unhealthy approach. You want to have fear in your life because in certain circumstances it protects you, but in other circumstances you want to use it to help elevate you to a new level. So I want to ask you guys, and you can either put it in the chat, but if you could verbally say it, that would be great. I just wanted to know from your guys' perspective, like, what are some common types of fears that you may have experienced or that you are just aware of in general, even if you didn't yourself experience it?
I think one of the fears that that I have experienced is just kind of not knowing, like, about the future, of how that's going to look like in certain situations, and just the uncertainty sometimes, that is there. So that has been something that I've experienced in my life.
Yeah, definitely. Uncertainties, I think that's like across the board for everyone. Anyone else?
I think fear of like losing loved ones, like either through death or just like for whatever reason. Like, I know we're believers, but we know that we're gonna be here for however many years God has for us. But just the thought of being separated from your loved ones, I think that puts a lot of fear.
Yeah, for sure. Fear of loss is huge, and that loss could be in any shape or form. So yeah, thank you. So the ones that I've identified, sorry, did anybody else want to share?
Fear of failing.
Yeah, that's a huge one, especially in the stage of life that we're all in, like as young adults or as people that are transitioning into full on, responsibilities and taking on new challenges. That's a big one. Thank you. Here are a few that I identified, and they're quite broad, and I think they cover a majority of what you may have either experienced or what you may have seen. So there's the unknown, which you've mentioned. There's financial stability, relational security, your career pathway, your spiritual development, your educational enhancement, your mental and physical health conditions. And I just want to clarify that the purpose of today is different than phobias. Those are a completely separate topic, and we won't be going into that discussion. But these are some of the things that create fear in our life. And in one way or another, they all overlap and they all affect different areas of our life. And in fact, in certain circumstances, they may all exist in each aspect of our life. So these are the kinds of fears that we face. Now, they all have 4 common attributes, and which is what I want you guys to recognize, or start being more intentional about recognizing them in your own life, because we'll get to the action plan. So the 4 common attributes that result in fear: uncertainty, attention, change, and struggle. Any scenario that presents itself with an uncertain outcome will result in a fear. Going back to the example that I mentioned, you could be going to a job interview, but because you're uncertain of whether you're going to land it or not, you will feel fear. Going to a forest, you will be uncertain of the kinds of conditions you'll face, the kind of danger that it might present to your life, and therefore you will feel fear. The second thing is attention. Scenarios that call for attention to us result in a fear. So this looks like for a student, this would look like when you're in a classroom, and sometimes when the teacher is asking questions, if you don't know something, you will be afraid of being the person that the teacher calls out, because you don't want that attention, because immediately when you're called, all the eyes are on you in the room. And the fear here is that you don't want to look foolish, or you don't want to say something that will hurt your future. And in general, there's just this attention that, tends to keep us away, that we don't want that kind of attention. That attention actually also exists for people who are afraid of public speaking, for example. They don't want to put themselves in positions where all the eyes will be on them, and they'll be scrutinized for everything that they're saying and doing. Then there's change. Any scenario that has a change will have a factor of fear in it, whether that's moving from jobs, moving homes, changing in the season of life that you're in, changing your circle of friends, changing habits, changing your hobbies. All of those things have a certain degree of fear in them, and they result in that fear that we all carry. The last one is struggle. So any scenario in which we see ourselves struggling in, it will create fear for us. One of the best examples that I can think of for this, in my personal experience, was when I was starting out my bachelor's degree. And I remember at the time, coming from somebody that comes from a science background that knows nothing about business, I saw, like, from the beginning of the first semester, first day, they lay out all your courses for the year, but you can actually go far ahead and like see your courses for second, third, and fourth year. And I remember looking at that sheet and thinking, oh my goodness, this is very long and lengthy, and this is going to be a struggle. And I remember fearing, constantly for a lot of my first semester of, how am I going to do this? Like, this seems like such a struggle. And even after first semester, I finished like 4 courses, and then I was like, oh, I only finished 4 courses. I still have, X amount of courses to complete. So scenarios that have struggle in them automatically present fear. Now, the point of this, I want you guys to analyze the scenarios in your life that you're afraid of and find these attributes for yourself, because what happens is identifying the fears is only the beginning. Identifying what leads to that fear is the next step, and that's actually going to be part of how you will overcome that fear. So let's look at some of the biblical characters that have faced fear and what they did in those scenarios. And I want to ask you guys for some examples of people that faced fear and that you have studied, and what that looked like. So if you guys can offer some examples of that.
I think one example I can think of is David, when Saul was chasing after him and he was after his life and just trying to kill him. Like, David experienced a lot of fear, and a lot of the Psalms that he wrote birthed out of that fear and those like feelings of feeling overwhelmed. So that's one person I can think of.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Jonah? Yeah, Esther.
Jonah, Esther, very nice.
Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel's a quite prominent one when you think of fear. David, and well, actually, David himself may not have felt fear, but Saul certainly did, and the Israelites did.
Moses.
Yeah, Moses, definitely. So the point I'm trying to get at here is all of the characters that you guys listed are definitely prime examples of people that have faced fear and worked their way through it. If you look at the Bible as a whole, you will recognize that to some degree, fear is actually part of every character's development. And in one way or another, there's a fear that exists in how they get from point A to point B, because God tells them, or they have a purpose that they need to achieve, but they don't know what that pathway in the middle is. And that's essentially the life we live. We see their stories because we can read them from beginning to end and see how it turns out, but we don't know how that is for us, and therefore that fear exists for us even to this day. The story that I want to look at, although all of those examples are great, and we could have taken any of those stories from this for this topic, but the one that I felt led to talk about today was actually Esther. And thank you, Sadel, for pointing that out, because Esther's story is so powerful in so many different ways. there's so many different lessons that we learn from her, and so much of the attributes that are present in the story are applicable even to this day in our life now. So you all know the story of Esther. I don't want to spend too much time just repeating it, but I'll generally summarize it. But Esther is selected to be queen, and then there's a order that is decreed against the Jews, and she's placed in a position where she has to defend her people, but that also means risking her life. And through the actions that she takes, she's able to deliver on that promise and not only give honor to God's name, but also save the Jews from the trouble that they were facing. Now, that was a quick summary. You guys can read the book of Esther to get more information exactly as to how the events play out. But what I want to focus on is the 4 elements that I shared with you earlier. I want to focus on how they are present in the story of Esther and what that means to us. So one of the first elements that I mentioned to you guys was uncertainty. And in the entire book of Esther, there's a lot of uncertainty of how the scenario will play out, whether she'll be able to pull through, and whether the king will change the rule, or whether Haman will get his way with what he has planned. If we look at Esther chapter 2, one of the first things that we recognize that happens is the change that occurs in Esther's life. That's when she's selected to be one of the girls that's going to be presented to the king to be the potential future queen. And we see that there's a change of her environment. There's a change of her lifestyle, because they spent a lot of time preparing for how they need to present themselves to the king. And that's not the kind of life Esther comes from. Then there's a change of future plans. If you think about it for yourself, if you place yourself in her shoes, or place yourself in a scenario where you're pulled out of your daily routine to now go and live the life of a royal, especially in that time, it changes a lot of the goals that you have. There's a lot of things that you can and cannot do as a royal that you can maybe as a regular person. So there's a lot of change that's occurring, and there's a lot of internal fear and uncertainty that's being created through this. Then we look at chapter 4, and we see in chapter 4 how there's Esther's struggle, that when she finds out from Mordecai the issue against the Jews, we find out that she's having an internal struggle of whether she should go ahead and present this information to the king, because if she presents herself, she's risking her life, because nobody's allowed to enter the king's quarters. And there's this internal struggle that she's facing. And then there's we look at in chapter 5, Esther's attention, where she has to draw attention to herself, because after the 3-day fast that she does, she puts on her royal robes, and then she stands in the inner court of the king's palace. And so now, like from a physical, practical perspective, she is drawing attention. She's standing at the place where she's not allowed to. And this could result in either her immediate death, or it could go the way that she's praying for. And that's essentially what ends up happening, that it goes in the way that she's praying for. And then we look at chapter 7, where uncertainty is also an aspect of this story. We look at the fact that when Esther is finally speaking to the king about what Haman had done, she's revealing to him in chapter 7, verse 3, she says, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish." If you notice the wording, she's using the word "if" a lot, and that's not something that would be used if she was confident in what she's saying. The point I'm trying to make here is that there's still this aspect of uncertainty from the approach that she has taken, because although she has prayed, she has prepared, she's approaching this scenario, she's talking to the king with an uncertainty of how this will play out. The king could still deny the request. The king could still, she could still be punished for her actions. There could be another outcome that could occur. And so the point here is this: we want to analyze what Esther did in this scenario that she was placed in to overcome the fears that she faced, because all throughout the story there's different scenarios that test her in different ways. If we look at chapter 4 verse 14, another thing that I want to point out to you guys is her cousin says to her, "For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish." I want to point this out because sometimes what we do is fear really gets us stuck where we are. There's this concept in psychology, it's called paralysis by analysis. And I found this like funny cartoon that really depicts what it is. Essentially what it is you spend so much time weighing the pros and cons that you actually never make a decision. And the problem with that is it's good to be wise in your analysis, and it's good to weigh your options. But if you spend too much time doing it, you'll never actually make a decision. And I have found in my life that there have been so many scenarios where all I'm doing is just thinking of maybe the worst case scenario or the best case scenario. And that's stopping me from achieving any scenario because I'm not even actually stepping forward and acting on anything. In Esther's situation, what this looks like is her cousin's telling her, if you keep silent at this time, God will still do what he needs to. He'll still deliver the Jews, but you and your house will perish. And I want you guys to reflect on this for your own life, because there might be something in your life right now that God is calling you to do or calling you to improve on, to act on. And because of the fear that you have internally, and maybe you're spending so much time just analyzing the situation that you're not actually taking any action, just know that like if God has designated something for you or designated a certain purpose, it will be achieved with or without you. He can use you, but he can also use another person. And the problem with that is you will miss out on the blessing that he has in store for you. So I really want you to remember this term, paralysis by analysis. When it comes to decisions that you're making in your life, spend time on them, of course. Seek spiritual counsel, seek guidance from your mentors or the people that, you see fit to help you out. Seek God's guidance above everybody else, but act on a decision. Don't just sit in the middle on the fence, because God himself doesn't like lukewarm people either. So you can't be sitting in the middle waiting for someone else to take action for you. Now, after analyzing Esther's story, I was looking at a few ways of what she did, and also we actually learned this in our Bible study of ways to fight fear. Okay, so I will share with you guys what some of the ways are that we not only studied this in our Bible plan, but I have found through practical life experiences that these are some tactics. Again, this is not meant to, be a bandage for every scenario in your life. And so always seek, God's provision in your life, God's direction in your life. But these are some tactics that you can use to help some common challenges that we all face. So first thing is acceptance. I shared with you guys earlier that accepting that we will have fear in our life for the remainder of it, and accepting that it will exist in every season of our life is a huge part in the battle that we have. Once you have accepted that, and you have accepted that that only makes you human, there's nothing wrong with you for having fear, it helps you feel at ease, and then you can begin to equip yourself. Second thing is self-audit. We learned this in the Bible plan, and I shared this with you guys earlier. It's so important to not only recognize our fears, but go deeper beyond where those fears come from. What are the trigger points? What are they rooted in? And if you want to take it a step further, this was also mentioned in the Bible plan, but we have talked about this in previous sessions, especially when it came to feeling anxiety and depression. Every fear that you have, there is a promise in the Bible that exists to fight it, take some time to find those promises and write them somewhere. I've seen people who have like boards in their room or like a mirror, and they have post-it notes with the verses on them. And those verses, those promises, they really, it may not seem like much on the surface, but it really changes the perspective in which you approach life. From a secular perspective, this is what people call affirmations. You must have seen those videos on Instagram with those, secular life coaches or people that promote prosperity, speak the affirmation into your life, speak positivity into your life. But we as Christians don't believe in that, because our power doesn't lie within us, it lies in God. Our dependency is on Him. He does everything good that we have, everything good that we can be is through Him. And so I want you to take that concept, but use it from a biblical perspective. There's a promise in the Bible that you can use to fight the fears that you have. So self-auditing is really, really important, because you need that self-awareness. Then you have an external analysis. There are scenarios in which fear is needed. For example, fear of the Lord in a reverence way is needed. We need to be respectfully fearful of God. Fear of the fact that you don't want to drive too fast because it's dangerous is needed. Fear of, applying to a new job or moving on into a new stage of life. Those are normal fears, but you want to analyze the external scenario within that. So for example, if you have a fear of applying for a new job, the external analysis would look like this. Do you have the credentials for the job? Did you lie about anything when you applied for the job? Are you confident in the fact that what you wrote on that paper, you can actually back it up with the skill sets that you have? Then you want to look at another external analysis would be, is the job that you're applying for something that fulfills the need that you have? Does it meet the requirements? And those are what the pros and cons are. As Ayub was mentioning earlier, like he shared that one approach he has taken is to think of the worst case scenario, which might sound counterproductive, but actually I've also utilized that approach in many scenarios, and what it does is it minimizes the fear, because when you can think of what the worst outcome is and put that into perspective, sometimes the worst outcome is not so bad. And this is not to belittle, serious scenarios in which there are very, very harmful outcomes. But generally speaking, you do want to do your due diligence. Fourth thing is bringing it to God. That kind of goes hand in hand with the self-audit, as I mentioned. Whatever fear you have, you can talk about it with your friends until you're blue in the face. You can talk about it with your parents, your teachers, your friends, co-workers, whoever, but nobody on this earth will be able to resolve that fear within you the way that God can. And that's because all of us have a limitation as humans, but He doesn't. And that's why it is so important. And although it's a very common concept, you all already know this, the act of doing it is something that we often forget to do. Bringing your fear to God means that you actually go and sit in prayer and talk about it with Him as you would with a friend. You read the Word of God proactively to figure out, maybe God is speaking to you through His Word of a fear that you might be having. And the last thing is act anyways. There's this really, really cool concept that I think I already did this in my life. I just didn't know that there's a term for it. There was a term for it, and you all probably already do this as well. But the term was do it afraid. And it's so simple, but so deep for me, because I was thinking of the Nike logo where it's like, just do it. And it's similar to that, where it's telling you that even while you're in fear, do that thing. Because sometimes you'll find out what God is calling you for after you've done it. I will share with you, my experience I've shared with, I think, each of you, last year I went paragliding in September, where you run down a mountain and you jump off. And all of you that know me know that I'm terrified of heights. I can't sit on a roller coaster. Like, I can't even sit on a children's roller coaster because of how afraid I am. And I don't know what happened to me that day, but I remember when the opportunity of that came to me, I booked it like a month in advance. And I had every moment to cancel that leading up to the day of. But I kept thinking to myself, like, there's two ways this scenario plays out. I won't do it, and my trip will be the way that I had planned, or I'll do it and I'll have something meaningful to remember for myself, but also a new challenge that I overcame. And again, I think I've talked about this with all of you individually as well, but leading up to that, I was like literally planning my in case something goes wrong, like what's going to happen to the things that I own, and like just worst case scenario I was planning out. And I remember that morning when we were driving up to the mountain, talking to the instructor and the people around me, and they're all like excited because they've done it before, and I was the only person there that was doing it for the first time. And I remember thinking to myself, like, what did I get myself into? But now I'm there, and the instructor, he's like, look, you have two options. You can either enjoy this and you're gonna run off with me because now we're strapped in, like now there's no time to back out, or you can be afraid the whole time, but either way we're gonna do it. And I remember now, once I read this phrase, when I heard it, I remember thinking back to that scenario, that either way I had to do it. And there's a scenario in your life that you all have experienced where you had to do it. You had to just do it afraid, regardless of what was going to happen. But now that you're aware of it, you can actually use this tool to your advantage, because if you're afraid, it doesn't mean that you can't act. And how we had discussed earlier that sometimes the fear itself, it cripples you. But doing something while you're afraid gives you power. I want to end off with the fact that there's so many promises in the Bible when it comes to fear. And you can take a screenshot of this, or I mean, it'll be sent to you afterwards anyways, so you may not need to. But these are some of the references of verses, and there's so many. Again, like you could pick any verse to help you overcome that fear. But a lot of these talk about fear, and the main one that I wanted to focus on to end off our session today was this: do not fear, for I am with you. It's telling you to not fear, but it's not saying it as a suggestion. It's saying do not. It is a commandment. And so when we look at a commandment from God and we apply it to our life, there's usually a benefit associated to it as well. There's usually a positive outcome. And that's what I want you guys to recognize, because there's two in here. There's really great positive reinforcement in this verse, which is do not fear. So first is the commandment, and you know that a commandment from God can be against you when He is with you. And I want you guys to remember this verse, and then I want you to remember the concept of doing it afraid. I know a lot of us have been stuck in certain seasons of our life, and this being the first session of 2023, and we're coming to the end of January. January has been a very, very difficult month for a lot of you, including myself, and in different ways. And as we progress forward in the year, there's a lot of uncertainty this year, especially when it comes to our practical means with the safety that's happening, the safety concerns in the city, the stabbings, the shootings, the theft. Then there's the financial concerns with the economy. Then there's the job security. Certain industries are impacted more than others. We all have a fear, and I just want to use this session to encourage you guys that the fear will exist, but we can still do what God called us to do with that fear. We can use it to our advantage, do the things that we're called to do, and we can do them while we're afraid. And while we're doing them, who knows what God can do in that scenario to transform your life.